Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa. I'm Rochelle Harrison-Pless. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, Japan joins the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. For the first time since World War II, the Japanese troops have the green light to use force if necessary. Brake failure is to blame for last month's deadly train crash in Cameroon. That's according to newly uncovered documents amid the ongoing investigation into the tragedy. More details a little later on in our exclusive report. And first, over the finish line once again, Rwandan cyclist Valens Ndayisenga takes home his second Tour de Rwanda title. But first, Japanese troops touched down in Juba this Monday to join the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. They're set to help out with engineering and construction work in the capital. However, the soldiers have the power to use force to protect civilians, UN staff and aid workers. Critics, however, say the move could plunge Japanese forces into conflict for the first time since World War II. Nicolas Germain has more.
It was an historic moment when these Japanese peacekeepers landed on Monday in South Sudan. For the first time since the end of the Second World War, they will be allowed to use force to protect civilians, UN staff and themselves. Japan's constitution forbids the use of force in settling international disputes, but the government reinterpreted it to allow Japanese troops to use force in some situations. The move was criticized by many in Japan who said it violated the country's anti-war constitution. The 350 self-defense forces will replace a previous contingent of Japanese peacekeepers who did not have a mandate to use force. There are 12,000 UN peacekeepers in South Sudan. They have come under fire for failing to protect civilians. The Japanese troops are arriving in a country in turmoil. Last week, the UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide sent out a stark warning.
I saw all the signs that ethnic hatred and targeting of civilians could evolve into genocide if something is not done now to stop it. I urge the Security Council and member states of the region to be united and to take action.
Fighting erupted largely along ethnic lines in 2013 after President Salva Kiir sacked his vice president Riek Machar. Last year, a peace deal was signed. Machar returned to Juba in April, but he fled after more clashes and the violence has not ceased.
To Mali now, where Sunday's local elections were overshadowed by deadly attacks that have been blamed on Islamist militants. According to security forces, at least 5 people were killed in 2 separate incidents. The violence came as the country held its first ballot since 2013. Amid widespread fears over security, many voters stayed away from the polling stations. Well, for more details, let's bring in our correspondent, François Rouet. He's in Bamako for us. François, several Malian soldiers and 1 civilian lost their lives in the attacks. Tell us more.
It happened around 4 p.m. yesterday when a convoy of the army was ambushed by a known gunman between the towns of Bambara Maoundé and Luanza in the center of the country. According to the security ministry today, at least 4 soldiers were killed, 4 others injured, and civilians might have been killed also in this attack. Besides that, according to official observers and other witnesses on the ground, several poll stations have been attacked and burned down by a known gunman, especially in the region of Timbuktu, while alleged Islamist militants threatened voters on their way to the poll station yesterday.
And authorities claim the assailants wanted to sabotage the vote. It's no coincidence that these attacks happened during the election.
Well, former rebels of the coordination of Azawad movements warned the authorities before the elections, saying they wouldn't allow the poll to take place in the areas that are under their control, and that did seize material for the vote in several locations. Other attacks allegedly led by Islamist militants, according to the authorities, were likely opportunistic, knowing that there have been a lot of convoys escorted by defense and security forces for these special elections. According to these observers on the ground, more than 50 poll stations out of 700 had to cancel the vote because of insecurity.
OK, François, thanks very much for bringing us up to date with that story. François Rouet in Bamako. Next, at least 3 children were killed after a car bomb rocked the Libyan city of Benghazi. The explosion, which went off near a local hospital, also left some 20 people wounded. For the last 2 years, fierce battles between rival militia groups have torn Benghazi apart as warring factions jostle for power. Monday's blast comes as pro-government forces continue their push to oust the Islamic State group from the coastal city of Sirte. But the jihadists are putting up a fight, planting bombs and booby traps in their final strongholds across the city. Well, this Monday marks 1 month since a deadly train crash in Cameroon, a tragedy that killed more than 70 people and injured hundreds of others. The packed passenger train flew off the rails as it travelled between the country's main cities, Douala and Yaoundé. As the investigation continues, newly uncovered documents point to a brake system failure. Our correspondents Patrick Fandio and Marcel Amoko have been back to the site of the accident and sent us this exclusive report.
Lifted out of the ravine, this is the carcass of one of the first 4 carriages from train 152 that went off the rails. The carriages are being lifted out to make sure no one is trapped underneath. The Cameroonian Prime Minister and several of his ministers heading the Commission of Inquiry visited the scene as part of a mission to shed light on this tragedy.
These are the cars that were in the ravine.
On site, Benoit Esiga, a former train conductor, is sought after by investigators for his expertise in railways.
It was awful. As you can see, all this damage shows the violence of the fall. You see the seats that are torn off, the metal's completely torn off. It was very violent.
A violent end for an overloaded train. According to this internal document obtained by France 24, the train consisted of 17 carriages weighing 675 tons. Yet, according to Camrail, the rail operator, a passenger train should not exceed 650 tons. The driver therefore must have gotten special permission from his hierarchy to leave the station overloaded.
That's the 232. It was here.
According to the experts' calculations, 8 additional cars were added in haste on the morning of the tragedy. 8 Chinese-made cars like this one, lacking a proper braking system.
What we can be sure of is that the braking system is to blame, and that's what caused the excess speeding that we experienced. This part of the track has to be passed at 40 kilometers an hour. Unfortunately, the train passed at 96 kilometers an hour.
On the morning of the tragedy, a train inspection identified a lack of brakes already existed on the locomotive and the brake pads were completely worn out. This alone is enough to bolster the investigation and trial, placing responsibility on Camrail, a subsidiary of the Bolloré Group targeted by several complaints filed in Cameroon and France.
Rwandan cyclist Valence Ndeyasenga clinched his second Tour du Rwanda title, crossing the finish line with a time of 21 hours, 15 minutes and 21 seconds. The annual bike race wrapped up on Sunday with the 22-year-old local cycling hero claiming victory 2 years after his first win. Throughout the country, bicycles are a common sight, a cheap and efficient means of transport. What is less common, however, is women riding two-wheelers. But one town in central Rwanda has proven to be the exception, as our correspondent Thais Brook reports.
Dan Seal calculates distances by counting pedal strokes. She bikes to market and her fields. A phenomenon that's bizarre elsewhere in Rwanda, but not here.
Here in Bugesera, it's not strange to see a woman on a bike. But for example, once I went to another town, Bichumi, not far from here, and people made fun of me. They looked at me, they laughed. Even the foreigners who came here are very surprised.
Bugesera is a dry region, and for many, water sources are far from homes. So women tend to bike the daily water errand.
Hello.
Dan Seal's neighbours got married 7 years ago. The dowry? A bike, of course.
In marriage, what's important is to bring a bike to the husband's family, because with a bike one can go to hospital or go to look at things at the market.
As is the case across Rwanda, bike taxis are everywhere. But even here, it's a job strictly for men. David came here to find work.
When I first arrived, watching a woman on a bicycle, I thought it was really strange, surprising. But I got used to it after a while.
For women here in Bugesera, having two wheels is a source of pride and independence, even if equality hasn't yet quite extended to the bike taxi trade.
And finally, hundreds of B-boys and B-girls from East Africa and further afield flocked to Kampala last weekend for the Breakfast Jam final. The annual event puts the spotlight on breakdance with workshops and exhibitions and, of course, acrobatic dance battles with some of the region's top dancers showing off their best moves. After much popping, locking and head spinning, the Tanzanian dance crew Hit the Beat were crowned the champions. Right, I'll be back in 45 minutes with more African news. Stay with us. Mark Owen is up next as Live from Paris continues.
French Connections, presented by Florence Villeminot.
They're known for their cuisine and saying hello with a kiss. They only work 35 hours per week, when they're not on strike, that is. How true are these clichés about France? Every week, Florence Villeminot tears apart stereotypes. Join us for insight into French culture and current events to understand what makes the French so unique.
French Connections on France 24 and France24.com.